I'm going to go out on a limb and say I am fairly confident that you're familiar with the concept of digital smile design. SmileCloud is the next evolution of that philosophy. It's a cloud-based design tool that utilizes AI for facial analysis and a library of real human teeth that are tailored to the actual person in front of us. Libraries that help us create treatment plans that are not only aesthetic, but functional. But this isn't just another software design. I know you're thinking, really? Another smile design software, another software demo. SmileCloud is different. This is about rethinking how we treatment plan across disciplines, how we can make better decisions in regards to design, how we can communicate more clearly with our teams and with our labs, and how we can show patients what is not only just possible, but inspire them as to the direction that they're headed. This isn't just another smile design interface. It's not just a smarter algorithm. It's the next chapter in a journey that's been unfolding for decades. Because to really understand where this tool fits and why it matters, we need to look at how far smile design has come, because it's something that we take for granted on our day-to-day basis. SmileCloud represents that chapter where we've transitioned historically from functional dentistry to then aesthetics, from digital planning, and now to this era of intelligent collaboration. Understanding that evolution helps us appreciate not only what this software can do, but what the actual problems are that it so elegantly solves. A wise philosopher once said, mastery begins with respect for the fundamentals. Without them, innovation is just improvisation. Yeah. And that philosopher may or may not have been ChatGPT 4.0, but it stands true. Fundamentals have been there from the beginning, and they've been there for a reason. So let me take you back to the origins of smile design, back to the 1930s, to the golden era of Hollywood film. Some of you may know who this is, and his namesake is still seen day to day on a makeup brand that you can find in your local drugstore. That man was Max Factor. Max Factor was a visionary in how he approached makeup. He was contracted by a number of different film studios, and he perfected the artistry of being able to create the illusion of perfection on the big screen. And to do this, he had to really assess and think about facial features. So he took this so seriously that he invented this interesting contraption, which assessed multiple different points of the face, the head, and in fact, points that we assess to this very day. He realized that he could manipulate the way the eye perceived the facial features, but the one thing that he couldn't change was the centerpiece of his masterpiece, the smile. Side note, I feel like people talk a lot of shit about dentists, but can we just take a moment to appreciate how horrifying this looks? She just looks like she's having the best time there. And so Max Factor reached out to one of his friends who just so happened to be a dentist in LA, and that dentist was Dr. Charlie Pincus, who is famously known for introducing the concept of Hollywood veneers. These Hollywood veneers were temporary bonded acrylic materials that were able to change the centerpiece that Max Factor was framing with his soft tissue artistry. And so you had these situations like the famed Shirley Temple, who was running around with the equivalent of what looks like today turkey teeth. And I never realized, but Dorothy's teeth in The Wizard of Oz are actually not her natural teeth. These are her real teeth. And they've really followed the rules of smile design that we use today. Smile arc, midline, buccal corridor, so many different features and factors, and designing that within the facial frame. Not to mention, she was hooked on methamphetamines that she'd been force fed essentially by the studios, and so that did not lend itself to a healthy teeth and gum situation. And this was the time in which the idea of the perfect smile was born into the consciousness of American society. We then move on past the 50s, the 70s, up until the 1980s and 90s, where the principles of smile design emerged and really began to crystallize in regards to the fundamentals. We had pioneers like Dr. Frank Spear, Dr. John Coys, and Pascal Meunier, who emphasized this facially driven treatment planning process. And I always have to sort of double check this, because the reality is these pioneers, these Goliaths, are still so relevant and making such an impact in our very day and era in this modern period of dentistry. But the reality is fundamentals remain for a reason, and these experts in that space continue to push what we can do with those fundamentals. They look at things like gingival architecture, facial midlines, facial thirds, contacts, embrasure percentages, emergence profile, red and gold proportions, incisal edge position, buccal corridor prominence. All things that we just sort of take for granted in this day and age.
Enter the 2000s, the birth of digital photography and 2D smile design. The widespread use of digital photography and the access to affordable cameras revolutionized the way that dentistry could be documented and recorded. This widespread use meant that patients were able to be photographed and you were able to check photos then and there rather than having to wait and see whether or not, after developing them, they were actually usable photographs. And only to realize that actually they weren't diagnostic, and wasting more time having to retake them. It was expensive as well to develop photos. This gave dentists the ability to have real-time feedback, and they were able to convert them into JPEG files and move them to computers so that they could communicate help them communicate visual treatment goals with patients and with labs. It sounds so simple, so duh. Like, of course they could use a JPEG. Then you could move it into a PowerPoint or a Keynote. But this was revolutionary. This was a quantum leap forwards in cosmetic aesthetic dentistry. And we were using softwares that weren't even designed for dental. We were able to be super resourceful and sort of MacGyver them into working for us based on the principles that we had. We were growing our understanding of the bigger picture of dentistry. We not just looked at the aesthetics and the analysis around that, but we came to really appreciate that nature has designed things in a way for a reason. And functionality and aesthetics actually really belong together, because ultimately, what is most functional actually typically tends to be the most aesthetic and beautiful. A good airway leads to a beautiful face, well proportioned, good jaw relationship. The perichromata and the texture on beautiful individualized teeth are what really enhances and translates veneers to be something that is no longer just looking man-made. You have the seeds of things like digital smile design with people like Christian Coachman who were traveling around the world and really developing their workflows in this analog digital hybrid where they would print off the digital photos and they would mark them up. And then from those markings, they would calibrate their calipers to figure out how much they needed to add in wax to their wax ups, translating that 2D design into a 3D object. And that was hard. That took a lot of artistry to be able to execute successfully. It was one thing for a lab to make veneers look amazing on the model, but if it didn't fit in context with the rest of the face, it could be a disaster. And so we then move into the 2010s up until around about now, where digital smile design hit the mainstream, where we moved from that analog digital hybrid to pure digital workflow. I'm sure there are some people out there who look fondly at these shapes and rulers, this database of elements that DSD came out with in the early days. And the late nights agonizing over cases on your Keynote. Side note, I don't understand the love of Keynote within the dental industry, but I think if you had been there for this era of dentistry, you would appreciate just how revolutionary this was in your workflow. We had the emergence of DSD Connect, digital labs, where you could be based in Sydney and you could be sending case files to Madrid on the other side of the world. We had digitization of orthodontics, being able to segment out individualized teeth and move them around and show a simulation of where you wanted it to end up. We had CBCTs, DICOMs, actually being able to export out of their softwares and turn those slices into an STL that then could be overlaid with an STL of the actual model. So then you had an even further understanding of the relationships between bone, tooth, and gingiva, and the gingival complex. The ability orthognatically to be able to see in context where in the face things were seated. Guided surgery was a big change, being able to have that 3D imaging and that CAD CAM workflow designing and using natural files that we could preserve the fidelity of through fine and detailed milling with monolithic restorations. We had 3D printing, which was a huge game changer, and the changing of that to become something that was more and more affordable to the average dentist. And lab. More and more data being added, developed, revolutionized, where all of these things converged to be able to have this digital workflow where we changed 2D or 3D into 2D, back to 3D, and do it in a way that's reproducible and predictable. And the best part about it was that you could show the patient from the start, physically inside their mouth, where they would end up when they finished. And from a medico-legal perspective, that was incredibly useful as well. And it meant that everybody in the team was all on the same page. And that brings us to now and the next steps. I always say to patients, we're living in the future, but the future is now. And because we are such a driven profession that we want to push these boundaries and develop and change technologies, the future is always now. We now have the ability to have these complex stacked data builds that show us the convergence of tooth, bone, gum, facial tissues, nerves, all of the aspects that we can gather together. We have new and improved ways of collecting data that has always been a challenge to be able to effectively and accurately bring into your design softwares. But with all this additional data, it then becomes the question of things are overwhelmed. There are so many data points that I question whether we're actually effectively using this data to its full capacity. This is where SmileCloud shines. It's introduced a collaborative cloud-based digital workflow with an AI-assisted library matching system that enhances precision and communication between clinicians, specialists, and technicians. And you ask me, what makes SmileCloud so unique? Well, let me paint you a picture first. This is me. And I have a patient who's come in, who's very excited to get started on their treatment plan. And so we start off by gathering their diagnostics. We gather DICOMs, STLs, photographs, videos, facial scans, all of the things we need. And then we upload them to Dropbox. And then I upload them into a planning portal. And before I upload that into the planning portal, I realized that someone in the team hasn't uploaded some of the records for the Dropbox. So then I have to chase up where the diagnostics are. I then upload into the planning portal, and within the planning portal, I put my instructions of what I would like. I then message a WhatsApp chat, letting them know that I've uploaded into the portal and that I've put instructions in there so that they know to go look at it. They then respond and send back a design or whatever I've requested with feedback notes, and then they message me in WhatsApp saying, hey, feedback's in there. And I then task myself with a HubSpot notification to make sure that it all gets done by specific dates and key timelines. And ultimately, it ends up being this head spin because there's so many steps, so many nuances where things will go wrong. There's too many links in the chain, too many different locations, and things get dropped. Not to mention, with something like data collection and data management, it's a team effort. You need the whole team on board to know how to upload things in certain areas. And when you're dealing with several different digital planning portals, it's very confusing and very difficult to onboard a new staff member with all of these nuances. And you end up in this situation where, like me, this is literally my computer. I have 6 different Google windows open with enough tabs to give anybody a small mental breakdown. And I'm not going to start a competition here, but we all have multiple missed messages on WhatsApp that are yet to be replied to, text messages galore, and missed phone calls. And you have family and friends wondering why they never hear from us. Because it's exhausting. You burn out. You get sick of all of these things popping up. And most of the messages, a lot of the time, are not even necessarily contextual to you as the clinician. It's more staff designing and proceeding cases in the background. This is where SmileCloud comes into the fold with a solution. It's your one-stop shop as a jump-off point. And there are 6 key things about it that I think makes it very unique and powerful. Number 1 is the AI-driven biometric smile design. SmileCloud uses artificial intelligence to search through a vast library of natural tooth shapes and generate photorealistic smile mock-ups tailored to the face and the dental anatomy. Each generated design uses a unique blend of natural shapes, ensuring both realism and personalization. So rather than relying on preset templates, its function is like a search engine for anatomy, offering authentic and harmonious results with minimal input. It's very good at analyzing facial features, facial data points. I've used a lot of softwares in my time, and I have found it's very rare that I need to adjust things in the SmileCloud facial analysis. It's pretty bang on, and you then have the ability to have the manipulation and adjustment of so many little fine details, embrasures, percentages, and I like the fact that it has real-time numbers, so you can have not only visual but quantitative data to be able to compare and analyze what's going on in regards to what treatment needs to be planned. It has real-time feedback, and as you're adjusting things within the 2D, the formula is thinking about it in context with the 3D smile design, because every adjustment you make is going to impact how that translates into your 3D mock-up and 3D diagnostics, treatment planning. And the photorealism is able to be manipulated and adjusted in many different ways to make it look believable. In terms of number 2, I love its effortless workflow and speed. I know that their little quote I always see pop up is that a design can produce the first smile mock-up in as few as 4 clicks, with plans to reduce that even further in the future. This streamlined process avoids repetitive preliminaries and tripping over my words, and prioritizes refinement only when needed. So what that means is that you're not having to go over stuff all the time and make all of these different iterations. It's something that organically happens. I'm going to paint you another picture. This is again me, and I had a day where, on one of my rare occasions, I had a day off. When I say a day off, we all know a day off is just a chance to catch up on paperwork, clinical work, maybe a little bit of housework. And I had a little sleep in, and I woke up and I checked my WhatsApp messages. And what do I see? A message from Fadi. Yes, stress, who is a colleague of mine. And he says, "Oh, just wondering where that mock-up is. Have the team printed it? It was 10 o'clock when I was reading this message. The patient's coming in at 11." And I thought, shit. That had completely gone through to past the keeper into the goals. I had not heard about it. I didn't realize. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Traditionally, if this had happened and I was trying to design on other softwares like ExoCAD, I would have been screwed because ultimately it would have taken me at least probably half an hour to get all of the data together, get all the records, upload them all, get them all in the right position, and then start working through the flow. It would take me at least sort of an hour to really get a design done. And also in that process, if I'm not bang on with my way that I set up the 2D photos for the smile design in relation to the 3D objects, whatever I give on the other end is not going to look good. It's going to be wrong. And that can be very, very out. SmileCloud is different because I have a lot of confidence in what I'm putting on that model is going to be consistently reproducible when you print it in the mouth. So this is the case in question. I printed everything after I madly did this design, and it only really took me probably 20 minutes, which was awesome. And that's the initial immediately afterwards that it looked like. And yeah, there were a few things we needed to tweak. And I know they say that you can design a incredible smile design in less than 4 clicks. But for my colleague who is overseas, you can do it in literally 2 words. This was a case where it was orthodontic space closure. However, we were also planning on doing some bonding afterwards. Her being younger, we'll do some resin bonding, and I took some review records. I sent it through to SmileCloud, and what I found after doing a wax up that really probably took me 5 to 10 minutes, I decided that I think she needs more refinement because the canines need rotating, and we just need to close the spaces a bit more because the height to width ratio is going to be wrong. It's not going to look good. And if we're going to do it once, do it right. And so in 2 words, he said, okay, and yex. I am not entirely sure what yex means, but I kind of got the general gist, and so we sent off for refinement. The thing with this effortless workflow is that it's very easy to learn. It's really a gateway for people who want to understand design. And yes, you're probably not going to be buying ExoCAD as a general dentist and designing up all your stuff because you don't have the time. And it's complicated. There's a lot of different features when it comes to these professional CAD softwares. CAD? CAM softwares. CAD CAM, you know. And so for that reason, it's a really great avenue for you to be able to get the groundwork down so the lab can then iterate and build upon. And the benefit is the orientations of the tooth files that you're placing in SmileCloud translate directly across to something like ExoCAD. I keep using ExoCAD as the example because that's my main one that I'll jump out into. And so 90% of the design is done. It's just finessing what you need to do with some of the smaller details in ExoCAD. And because of its simplicity, it means that everyone from a new grad who wants to do some alignment and a little bit of bonding can reasonably inexpensively design that for themselves, because lab designs, they can get expensive, and when you're a new grad, you don't always have the accessibility to those sorts of services. And it works all the way through to the other end of the spectrum, where you have somebody who's an expert, who's been practicing for 30 years doing complex multidisciplinary dentistry. But it's a simple and elegant system that is very malleable depending on what your needs are. The third reason is the 3D review and collaboration tools. It lets clinicians overlay 3D data like CBCTs, intraoral scans, and restorations in the browser. You can annotate directly on the 3D, measure critical distances, and use heat maps to assess static occlusion or prep clearance or collisions, all chairside. The cross-sectional views also allow you and helps you to evaluate biological structures like bone levels or restoration margins in positions, particularly when you're looking at surgical implant planning contexts. This, yes, is something that you could do on other softwares, but it's simple, it's easy, everything's already all loaded. You just have to select what you want to build into the stack. This is a primary example of something that you can quickly use to be able to enhance your communication. This is a patient, and I'm sure it's a classic case for a lot of people who'd had clear aligner treatment, and she was adamant that the wire wasn't working, it was flexing, that her front teeth were moving. I could tell down to the micron level that no, it was the same. It was fine. And in fact, if anything, she had been not wearing her aligner retainer of an evening, because I could see that quadrant 1 had shifted and had lost a bit of the expansion we'd built over time. And so my hygienist came back because the patient was inquiring how much had it moved, and I could assess and find that it had moved somewhere between 0.1 and 0.2 millimeters, 100 to 200 microns. Is that clinically significant? It depends on the patient, but having that level of detail is very, very valuable from a communication perspective, but then also from a medico-legal perspective. If they turn around and are adamant that the treatment plan hasn't worked and that things aren't moving, nothing's changed, I can show, well, actually, no, look at this data. Like, it's there. You can't argue with data. It allows for you to integrate 3D planning in situations like FP1s, which have always traditionally been a very challenging case. You have the ability then and there to be able to see prosthetically how does that relate to your implant placements. A combination between surgical planning and aesthetic planning. Because for a long time, people have placed implants and sort of found the best bone, and then we figure out afterwards how are we going to get something on there on the top. This allows us to see that end point before we even place anything. And having that prosthetic implant interface also means that we can really think about how to approach extracting the teeth, cultivating the sockets and preserving them, creating those forms. Being able to segment out the individual roots allows us to be able to then look at what's going to be the best custom healing abutment, pre-making them so that as soon as you're taking that tooth out, you're putting something that is biologically identical in terms of that profile and cross-section. Number 4 is the centralized case management in the cloud. Cases are stored as a visual storyline that's accessible from any device. There's no fragmented file sharing. There's everything there. Everything lives securely in the cloud with real-time tracking and smart notifications. Key clinical findings like photos, scans, videos, STLs, and DICOM files, they can all be uploaded and viewed seamlessly in this browser without external tools. This is what your browser looks like, and this is a real-time recording of processing and looking around. But you can see there that everybody is all lined up. You've got the ability to change the cover photos, see what you want to see. You can change patient names, add new cases. You can see different categories on the left. If you want to add categories, that's doable. It's all very simple and organized. And then when you enter into the patient, you have the storyline. You have it organized by dates. So you've got your initial documentation, you've got your mock-up files, CBCTs. You can categorize this and break it all down into individuals, or you can have a look at it in all the documents section. You also have the ability to star key and relevant documents and files, depending on what you want to be easily and quickly accessible. You even have the option to incorporate articles. So I'm sure everybody's had those patients who want data on why you're using a particular bone graft over another one, what material safety sheets, anything they need and desire, we can have stored here in one location so you know what they've had access to and you know what the team has provided for them to read in regards to their case. And on the left here is their answer for WhatsApp. So you have your virtual treatment room where you can invite exactly whoever it is that needs to be in the room. No more random messages about other cases, because if you have a practice where you have a few people working within it as clinicians, but you're working with one particular lab, you might have somebody else's cases popping up. You can actively invite people, email them, get them to come in, or you can use the drop-down menu for adding people to be able to find what you need. And anything that's relevant to you pops up in your notifications. You have access through this via your phone as well. So when you're out and about, you can check things to keep the ball rolling. You have chat messages with unread notifications if anyone's mentioned you in any particular spots to really draw your attention on something that's urgent. You have requests, you have activity, so you know what people are doing in the background. Because it's hard when you have an external portal. You don't know whether A, has the lab seen it, because all you can see is that you've uploaded that. And B, you don't know what's happening. Is it pending? Is it processing? What's going on? You have the data to be able to track that. Number 5 is the patient-facing passport app. SmileCloud has a passport that enables you to securely share treatment plans, smile simulations, scans, 3D design previews, videos, and documents directly with the patient, and it supports encrypted communication, which fosters informed decision-making and trust. It's all documented there. It makes the patient feel like they're part of the team as well, because ultimately it's their teeth that you're working on. It's their body, and they deserve to be empowered with knowledge and information rather than just saying, all right, leave it with me, I'll sort it out. they want to know what's going on. And it's really sleek, it's simple, it has all the things you need, and it presents it in a really nice and effective way. And it's Apple and Android friendly. So I've always struggled with some softwares only liking Windows, some softwares only liking Apple. It's really nice having something that's agnostic. It will work across whatever you have in your heart's desire. And that brings me to number 6. I love this system because it's open platform. It is cross-platform interoperational, and it is designed to accept all of the standard files, STLs, OBJ, PLY facial scans, DICOM CBCTs and DCMs, JPEGs, PNGs, PDFs, MP4, all of them. The openness allows you to be able to integrate with various scanners and software programs and platforms without being locked into this proprietary hardware ecosystem. Because it pisses me off when you have certain products or services, and I'm not looking at anyone in particular, but you have these situations where you have to have this specific scanner if you want to use this specific center, and relationships change, contracts change. You might go and buy a $30,000 scanner, and then 6 months later, the companies have a falling out, and now it's not helpful. Openness keeps the market competitive, but also it allows people to work together. It allows companies to work together and makes things accessible, so you can try out new products without having to lock yourself in these roads. And particularly, like, I've been out now for 8 years, but in my early years as an associate, I don't really have the buying power to be able to make decisions and calls on big practice softwares and systems and digital products. I have to just use what I get given. And so this allows you to be able to be flexible with that. And you have the accessibility from any device. The platform runs entirely on a cloud-based system, and it's a browser-based system, so there is no software to install. And in Australia, which is famous for having some of the world's shittest internet, it actually works very efficiently, which is honestly amazing because it's ridiculous how terrible our internet is, considering how expensive it is. This open access model allows clinicians and labs to log in from anywhere, including Mac, PC, tablet, mobile phone, a potato. Like, at this rate, it's amazing where you can get access. It opens communication. SmileCloud supports that real-time collaboration, version tracking, and messaging, which promotes that openness between users rather than this static single author authority workflow. And it plays nicely with other systems. It encourages interdisciplinary input. It breaks down silos between different dental softwares and hardwares. And that, to me, is one of the biggest things I love about SmileCloud, because they have such a strong belief that they will always be open. They will, despite the fact that they're owned by Straumann, they are trying to bring people out of silos, whether you're using an assortment of different products that aren't Straumann necessarily. They want it to be a smoother process, because I have some cases historically where I've ended up using at least 4 different softwares, maybe even 5, jumping in and out on different sections because one software might do something else slightly better, or or there's always just fiddly things across different areas. And I get so frustrated not having the ability for them it all to talk together. Like, I get that different businesses have different requirements, but it just ends up making things a really clunky user experience for the user. And when something like SmileCloud comes along that is so streamlined, it's the simple progression to say, well, stuff all these other annoying softwares, I'm going to SmileCloud. It fosters that transparency in the treatment planning process from clinician to patient. And also, again, I know I keep harping on about it, but from a medico-legal standpoint, that is very, very valuable. So, this is where the magic happens. We're going to move into projects. Projects is where you can see all of your different iterations and planning that you've been working on. You have 3 main areas in terms of the design and file reviews. And then you have the ability to compare. So we have Smile Design, Blueprint, Review, and Compare. Let's start with Smile Design. Its purpose is, it's the 2D component of the digital Smile Design. It's creative and diagnostic within the stage where you can build a facially driven simulation of the smile. Its key features are that you can upload a patient's facial photo and it collaborates and calibrates with them using anatomical landmarks. It uses AI to generate a smile frame based on the facial references. It selects tooth shapes from a real human tooth library and not just your average morphs. And you're able to then customize this by adjusting size and width and length, axial inclination, position relative to the lips and the gingival margin, and layer the design over facial photos for full facial visualization. It's ideal for that early phase communication, visual mock-ups, and motivating patient acceptance. So for example, as you're adjusting things, you can do it either unilaterally or bilaterally in a symmetrical fashion. The world is your oyster, really. There's multiple different shortcuts on the keyboard that you're able to use to manipulate and adjust. And you can see real time, things are changing, things are adjusting. One of the big things that they really emphasize as the creators of SmileCloud have often said is that we are looking to preserve the fidelity and the proportions of the tooth, respect the anatomy. If you have to really adjust teeth a lot, they're probably not the right teeth to be putting in that area, because from a soft tissue perspective, it will be much more successful if you have something that works in the current environment, or alternatively, it supports the new gingival shape that you've created. And that can be really powerful in healing and maturing and developing an area. And so this is the key phase where you're putting in this data based on what is existing there or what you're proposing to do. And it spits out all of these different options, all these iterations with these little tabs on the right-hand side of different colors. Significance of that is it tells you how closely anatomically that file is associated with the data that you've inputted on the current situation. I really love it because it works on the theory of tackling this thing called the working memory theory, working memory model. And the significance of that is, I've heard Dr. Florin lecture about this previously, and he says to the audience, imagine I ask you, name 7 different hand soap brands. You'll be able to rattle off 3 or 4 pretty quickly, but to get to 7, you actually have to really think about it. That's the thing about working memory. You have this propensity to always use the same 3 or 4 designs because that's what you remember in your head. This tooth looks this way, or this face looks a certain way, then I'll use this file type. And I had to catch myself. I know personally, I would use the same, like I loved certain files and I would always just default to them because I knew that they worked. But that defeats the purpose of using natural tooth files, because if you're just using the same category of 4 or 5 different files, it's very much just using what you would have used if there was a lab hand making it in a man-made way. And the reality is, unfortunately, with working memory development, we're all on the downhill slope. It doesn't get better after you're an adult. If anything, it plateaus and then you lose what memory you did have. But the cleverness about SmileCloud is AI is being used in this case to be like the horse and we the rider. It's giving us these suggestions for us to be able to curate what's going to work best in a situation. So for example, in this case, the gingival margins aren't in the correct space. There are far too much tightness within the ratios of the front 6. They're too narrow, they need to be widened. There's heaps of different things that needed adjusting, and so biocompatibly, what was being suggested initially would not have worked. It would be a case where you'd have to warp it heaps. And then adjusting it, you're getting these more appropriate suggestions. And orange, I don't know why they chose orange graduating down to like yellow, grey, and then black, but orange is good. Orange is good in this case. But once you've found what you like, I'm then able to move on to the latest and greatest and honestly groundbreaking part of the software, which is the smile simulation. It's called Yes. And so being able to take a photo of somebody with this design and have AI create it into a video is honestly mind-blowing. It takes a little bit of time to render it, but while you're rendering it, you can be doing other stuff and it will tell you when it's ready to go. And you can see here, this is a patient who's an all-on-4 case. There is no way in high hell I'm going to be able to get his teeth in a mock-up and have something that doesn't feel absolutely ridiculous in his mouth. He's already self-conscious as it is. And so your traditional DSD mock-up just is not going to work. This, on the other hand, it doesn't have that uncanny valley feeling. It genuinely, having seen these patients in the flesh, the way that they move, it is really quite similar to how we find them. Step number 2 is blueprint. So this is where you can translate the work that you've done from the 2D smile design phase across to the 3D phase. The purpose of this is to transform your smile design into a digitally aligned plan across dental disciplines, whether that be orthodontics, surgery, prosthetics, a whole host of things. The key features being that you can add intraoral scans and STLs, scan faces as object PLY files, radiographs, CBCTs, DICOMs, jaw movement, all of the things that you need. And you align them with your design with models that are 3D within the facial reference and map out the treatment sequence. So you're able to annotate and say, plan is to align first, then prep the laterals, then augment the ridge, then deliver the final zirconia in that area. And you can assign these different steps and note each of the phases with different details. So maybe it's an expected timeline, or it's a projected costing, or it's a specific lab that you want working on that part of the case. It allows us to use this case to bridge between concept and execution, using that communication with exact design intentions to your lab and technician or other interdisciplinary teams. Everybody is on the same page. You can't make assumptions around what you think people want because it's all there. It's all right in front of you. And it does a good job of translating the 3D from the 2D. A lot of criticisms previously have been that, oh, you can't change a 2D into a 3D because it just doesn't work in terms of the spatial positioning. People would just say, no, it can't be done. But the algorithm that they've developed means that it can. It's really effective. Traditionally, once upon a time, when I would look at 2D and I was translating to 3D, it was a bit of an art form. Like there wasn't a exact science, because with 2D photos, yes, you are always going to have warping, but that's why we were benefited by the fact that we have a lovely, large and long photo studio. So we're able to have a bit more space rather than having that fisheye effect. But Exocad could compensate for that to some extent, not entirely though. And so I'm always pleasantly surprised how it will spit out this initial recommendation. And then it's just a case of tweaking. So it's got all of the little bells and whistles that most design softwares will have. You can drag and move things. You can smooth surfaces. You can add or remove. You can adjust the intensity. You can also reduce the size and increase the size. But as I said, the founders of this software really emphasize, don't go messing with files, because let's use the analogy of if you have a round hole and you're trying to fit a square peg through that hole, the square peg is not the right choice. And it's the same with teeth. If it's not compatible, change the file, choose something different. It will make your life much, much easier. And then once you've planned what you need to plan, simply you can export whatever you need in whatever combinations. So you can export the entire design, the entire model, or you can export individualized, segmented pieces of it out. And you can make these beautiful mock-ups that are physically able to be tried in the mouth. You just have to make them into a solid model, 3D print them, and away you go in this traditional DSD Smile Mockup system. It's something that is very, very efficient to create, and it's pretty affordable. It's easy. You're not having to pay hundreds of dollars or euros or pounds to have a quality smile design made. And it gives you the ability to test, what is this going to look like? Get the patient excited. And not to mention, having that final destination means that from an orthodontic perspective, for example, in this case, I need to do treatment for him. So I was able to add the mock-up, the technical mock-up, which shows where do we want the final teeth and restorations to be. And I can give that to the orthodontist who works for the treatment planning service that comes as part of our clear aligner system, to then build in those relevant biomechanics and get everything into the right position and do it in a way that is biologically compatible. We're not extruding teeth and roots out of the bone. We're doing it in a way that is safe and predictable. When you enter into this blueprint phase. It allows you to select teeth and choose what you want to do with them. And initially, when I first saw what was optioned, I was kind of a little bit taken aback. Keep, shape, align, remove, relabel, missing. It doesn't seem like a lot of options to be able to do all the things that you can do. But with these options, you can build out your designs around FP1, FP3, pre-surgery. You can go through and show and build a simulation of orthodontically where you want teeth to turn up. You can plan full mouth rehabs, bite lifts, veneers. The world is your oyster. And then we move on to the third feature, which is, yes, it's 3D, but it's more so something that I utilize in a clinical respect. So you're able to collect and consolidate feedback from your team, or use it to revisit plans over time. The key features are that you can invite collaborators like your orthodontist, surgeon, ceramicist, whoever, wherever, whenever. You can leave threaded comments directly on the design, mark things up, draw attention to certain areas. You can upload different versions, before and afters, new scans, wax ups, control access and tracking, and track all of the decision histories so you can see who's decided to do what and where. Because often people forget what they've done, and it's not a malice thing, but sometimes they just don't realize, oh, actually, no, I did do that. There's so many cases that you're looking at, so many things happening, so it gives you that accountability. The use case is that it's perfect for coordinating with your wider team, documenting changes, keeping track of those evolving treatment plans, especially in complex cases. This is a classic example of using it chairside as essentially a quality control digital prep analysis. So this case, it was a lady who came in, she had some darker stumps, and so prior to prepping, I said to the lab, after they'd initially seen her for a shade matching prior to the prep, how thick do you want this to be? How much material do you need? How much reduction do you need for that proposed design? And they told me 0.8 millimeters would be perfect. So I prepped and I thought, looks good. I've done a good job. Looks very nice. And then I scanned, which took about 2 minutes, and then I overlaid it and realized, no, it is not as good as you thought it was. It's under prepped in a few of the areas. And if you were to send that to the lab, they're not going to be able to do what they need to do. Or they'll have to make it finer and thinner in that area, and the color won't be right. And once upon a time, you would then have to wait to get the patient back in, re-prep, take another impression. The patient's pissed off, you look incompetent, you're wasting chair time that's valuable, and you're also wasting the lab's time. Or you'd have a disagreement with the lab and say, oh, just make it work, my prep's fine. There's nothing more humbling than when you start reviewing your own preps, you realize, oh, maybe I didn't do as good of a job as I thought I did. It makes you aware, makes you think. And the feature number 4 is compare. The purpose of this is the ability to assess different options, track progression, present before and after designs to patients. It's pretty flexible. It's something, admittedly, I don't use that much, but something that I should use more, because you can use the key features for side-by-side comparisons of different smile designs and treatment options. Use a slider or a flip mode to alternate between before and afters, option A versus option B, mock-ups versus finals. You can export images or animations for patients after consultations or for a documentation perspective. It's tricky sometimes when a patient comes in and they have a complex case to explain in a simple way that they can understand why you're suggesting one option versus another. And being able to simulate that and show them visually just takes it to another level of understanding. So for example, a bite lift. A patient will be coming in and they want to have veneers done, and they'll ask you, Doc, why do you want to put build-ups on my bottom teeth? I'm already spending tens of thousands of dollars on my top teeth. Why do I have to go and spend more on my bottom? And you can show, hey, you're a stress head, you've worn your teeth out, and we've got to put more rubber on the tires. So this is what we're proposing, and this is why you need to invest that additional cost financially and in terms of time to achieve an ideal aesthetic and functional goal. Or, for example, you can show a patient, why am I suggesting to extract your wisdom teeth and sequentially distalize your teeth orthodontically? Why is it a case that if we don't make space in a certain way, we're not going to be able to achieve an outcome for you? Showing that the movements that you want me to do are probably not a good idea because I'm going to be busting roots out of the bone, and that's not good for anyone involved. And you can even use it from a recreational perspective. So a friend of mine had his wife's 50th and he desperately wanted to go as Freddie Mercury. And surprisingly, Freddie Mercury is actually a very, very difficult person to find a clinically correct photo to be able to design off. But I did find something that could work, roughly speaking. And we found some files that were pretty similar to what he originally had. And we took it away and we designed what we needed to design.